One winter night, an 8-year-old girl was shoved into a blizzard with nothing but thin pajamas and socks. Alone in the dark, cold biting through her small body. Hope should have ended there, until an aging shepherd dog broke free and found her. What happened next turned a silent tragedy into a story the whole town would whisper about. A neighbor's porch light cut through the storm. A desperate howl brought help running, and survival became something more than luck. But what happens after rescue, when safety has to be rebuilt from nothing? This is the night an old dog refused to let go, and changed a little girl's life forever. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The wind moved across the fields like a restless animal, pushing loose snow into soft spirals that broke against the sides of the farmhouse and hissed beneath the old cedar boards. Inside, the heat had long since thinned. The wood stove's glow in the kitchen couldn't reach the small bedroom at the back, where Lila sat cross-legged on a quilt that smelled faintly of soap and cedar chests. Her pajamas were too thin for a night like this, patterned with tiny stars that had begun to fade from too many washes. She traced one fingertip over a rip in the knee while listening to the voices rise and break beyond the door. Her father's was the loudest, low and rough until it wasn't, until it snapped sharp enough to rattle glass. Her mother's came back thinner, a thread of protest quickly swallowed by the bigger voice. The rhythm was familiar. His boots across the kitchen floor, her quick steps retreating, then the crash of something knocked off the counter. It wasn't the first winter storm that had found her hiding like this. The windows trembled as the wind shoved at the house again, and a cold draft crept under the door. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and looked toward the corner where the toy box sat shut. She hadn't played in days. It felt dangerous to make noise when the voices turned this way. There was a thump, maybe the back door, maybe his fist. Lila held her breath. Even her heartbeat seemed too loud. She could make out words now, just a few. Can't take it, always, enough. The last came like a hammer strike. Then silence, long enough for her to count 10 slow breaths. A board creaked in the hallway. She flinched and looked at the door, though she didn't move, didn't dare. The knob stayed still. Another crash in the kitchen broke the quiet, followed by her mother's voice, small and pleading. Lila tucked her knees up and pressed her forehead there until the sounds turned to muffled sobs and the wind's long howl reclaimed the house. On the wall above her narrow bed hung a single-framed picture, her and Bear, the old dog, taken 2 summers ago by the creek behind the property. His fur had been black once, but had faded to smoke gray around the muzzle. In the picture she's laughing, mouth open wide, hair stuck to her cheeks from creek water. Tonight that girl felt far away, sealed behind glass. Down the hall, the arguing flared again, jagged and quick this time, overlapping words she couldn't untangle. A chair scraped. Then her mother cried out. Not long, just once, but enough to make Lila's chest seize. She wanted to run, and didn't know where. She wanted Bear, but Bear was in the mudroom, probably chained. Father said the dog roamed too much. She slid off the bed without letting the boards groan and went to the window. Frost feathered the glass. Outside, night stretched wide and white. The yard lamp had been broken since October, so only the pale shine of moon and snow lit the drifts. She pressed her palm to the glass and felt the bite of cold through it. If she opened the window, the air would claw her lungs. Still, she thought about it, about climbing out and into that white silence rather than staying with the voices. Down the hall, her father's boots pounded once, twice. A door slammed, then quiet again, heavy and absolute except for the wind and the faint ticking of pipes cooling behind the wall. Lila waited a long time, counting to 30 and starting over when fear spiked. Her throat felt small and dry. She whispered Bear's name once, too soft for anyone to hear. Somewhere far off, the dog answered with a low, uncertain bark, muffled by walls and storm, but enough to break her loneliness. She closed her eyes, whispered again, and for a moment the wind didn't seem so cruel. The shouting came back like thunder after a long lull. Lila had dozed in the corner of her bed. Quilt pulled over her head, but the first slammed cupboard jolted her awake. The kitchen was alive again with her father's voice. Too loud to be words, just sound that cracked and rolled through the old beams. She sat up, dizzy with a sudden cold, and crept to the door. The air smelled sharp, wood smoke, and something metallic. Through the thin wood came the slam of a pot, a short cry from her mother, then heavy boots pounding the hall. She didn't have time to hide. The door banged open, and there he was, face flushed deep red above the collar of his flannel, eyes wild in the low light. "Up!" he barked, one huge hand pointing. She hesitated, confused and frightened, and that made it worse. He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but with a force that promised hurt if she resisted. "Out!" he snapped, and the word felt too strange to process. Out where? It was midnight, the house trembling from the storm. He dragged her through the narrow hall, past the kitchen where her mother stood frozen, one hand to her mouth, the other braced on the counter. Dishes lay shattered across the floor. For a second, Lila looked back, silently begging, but her mother's eyes were wide and wet and scared too. No help came. The back door unlatched with a metallic squeal, and before Lila could even protest, she was through it. The cold was a fist to the chest. The wind screamed across the yard, driving snow sideways, so thick it stung her cheeks like needles. She gasped, and the air felt like knives in her throat. The boards of the porch were icy and bit at her bare feet. She tried to turn back, but the door slammed before she could move, the bolt shooting home with a hard final sound. For a heartbeat, she thought he would open again. Maybe yell some more, maybe pull her back, but nothing came, just a house's shape against the white night, dark windows and no light, but the kitchen glow fading behind curtains. She stood there stunned, cold stealing the strength from her knees, hair whipping into her mouth and eyes. The wind stole her breath when she tried to call out. She pressed her fist to the door, knocked with tiny hands, then pounded, but the wood stayed unyielding. "Mama!" she cried once, the name small and thin against a roaring storm. Nothing answered but the creak of an eave and the long rush of snow. Instinct told her to move. The boards were too cold, her feet already numb. She stepped down into the drift, sinking ankle deep, and stumbled into the yard where the snow swallowed her tracks. The world outside was pale chaos, the barn a gray shape half erased, fences ghosted by blowing flakes. Her night clothes were instantly soaked. Thin flannel stuck to her legs, hair crusted with ice. She turned once toward the door, hoping, but there was no outline in the window, no hand reaching back. Her teeth began to chatter, so hard her jaw hurt. The cold was not like opening the freezer or standing by the door when it leaked. It was alive, searching, crawling over her skin. She wrapped her arms across her chest and tried to think where to go, but every path looked the same, white swallowing white. The driveway curved somewhere beyond the dark, but she could barely see the porch behind her now. The wind caught her, and she staggered sideways, then righted herself and took a step. Just one. Another. It felt like walking in a dream where legs wouldn't work right. She tried to call for Bear, though she knew he was chained in the mudroom. Her voice cracked to nothing before it even left her mouth. Still she whispered his name, hoping somehow he would hear. The cold was inside her now, toes first, then fingers. She remembered something from school about frostbite and shiver harder. She thought if she could just make it to the barn, maybe it would be less brutal. The big double doors loomed somewhere ahead, dark and shifting in the storm's breath. She tried for them, but the snow grabbed at her legs and the wind shoved her sideways until she fell to her knees. She wanted to cry, but the tears froze at once and made her face ache. She got up, swayed, and kept going because standing still felt worse. Every step was a decision, heavy and slow. The house behind her had already disappeared. In the roar of the storm, the slam of the door felt like something final, echoing again and again in her head, a sound she would never forget. The first step off the porch dropped her into snow that came nearly to her knees. It was powder on top, but heavy and wet beneath, clinging to her thin pajama bottoms until cloth turned dark and stiff. The cold punched straight through the small warmth she'd carried from the house. She gasped and the air burned sharp and dry, scraping the back of her throat. Each exhale curled into white vapor and vanished instantly. Her toes went from stinging to numb in seconds. The night wasn't quiet. The storm had a voice, whispering and howling and rattling loose pieces of tin on the old shed. It felt alive, watchful, almost angry. She tried to move forward, but the weight of the drifts stopped her mid-step. Her arms flailed for balance, and she fell sideways into the snow, the shock of cold against her chest stealing breath for a full second. She scrambled up, coughing. Hair pasted across her face and instantly crusted with ice where tears had been. She wiped at her eyes, but her fingers were stiff and clumsy already, slow to obey. The barn loomed faintly, a darker smudge against endless white, and she turned toward it because it was the only shape left to trust. Her feet sank deeper as she went. Each time she pulled one free, it came with a sucking sound, wet and cruel, and dropped her farther into the next drift. The quilt she left behind would have been heavy, but at least warm. Now she had only thin flannel, and the shock of snow seeping upward from her ankles. She couldn't stop shivering. The shakes came from somewhere deep beyond control. The wind shoved at her back, then sideways, changing direction without warning. It carried flakes so fine they cut at her eyelids and lips. She tried to shield her face with her hands, but that only made it harder to push forward. She looked back once and wished she hadn't. The house was gone, erased by white. Only the porch light's faint glow remained, and even that blinked out as if swallowed. The sight hit her with sudden loneliness, so big it felt like falling. She wanted to run back and pound the door until someone opened it, but she already knew no one would. The slam still rang in her ears. She could almost feel the cold on her small fists, the silence afterward. Forward, then one foot, then the other. She fixed her eyes on the barn doors and made herself think of nothing but getting there. Her breath came ragged and quick, clouds bursting and vanishing. The tears that had started when she fell now turned hard at the edges, tiny beads of ice on her lashes. When she blinked, they scraped. She pushed on anyway, sobbing without sound, body moving because stopping would be worse. The ground changed slightly under her, firmer where the wind had scoured the snow thin. Relief flared, but only for a moment before another deep drift swallowed her legs. She went down hard this time, catching herself with bare hands that screamed from the cold. She stayed there for a long moment, chest heaving, snow pressing into her sleeves until her arms ached. It would be easy to curl up, to let the snow cover her and end the stabbing pain in her skin. A slow, sleepy warm tease at the edges of her exhaustion, whispering that it might feel better to just rest. The sound rose faint behind her, a single bark, muffled but real. She twisted, heart leaping. For a second she saw nothing but blowing white. Then another bark, closer, urgent and low. Bear? She couldn't be sure. The storm shredded the sound. She wanted to answer, but her throat barely worked. She coughed and tried anyway. A broken bear. That disappeared almost instantly. Still, hope flickered. She pushed herself up, swaying, and forced one foot free. Then another. The barn seemed no closer, but she set her jaw and took a step. The cold was still knives, but there was a tiny ember now. Not warmth, but will. Behind her, just once, the bark came again, sharper, cutting to the gale. She took another step toward the only dark shape in the white, and refused to fall. The barn that had seemed possible a moment ago vanished behind a veil of driven white, swallowed as if it had never existed. Lila stopped and turned slowly, but the wind punished her for it, slicing across her face and forcing her eyes shut. She knew the house was somewhere back there, but when she looked she saw only snow and darkness. The place that had been home, the warm rooms and the smell of coffee and wood smoke, might as well have been on another planet. A low sob tried to push up her throat, but she bit it back and kept moving because staying felt like giving up, and giving up meant Cole winning everything. The field stretched flat and endless, and then a darker smear appeared to her right, the tree line. She had played there in summer, among the first row of maples and birches, building forts with fallen limbs and pretending shadows were castles. Now the woods looked different, alive and waiting, but at least they were something solid, a place to hide from the wind and the memory of shouting voices. Her small body turned toward that dim refuge and began to slog forward. Every step took effort. The snow reached mid-thigh now in uneven waves, soft where the drifts piled, crusted sharp where the wind had glazed the top. Each time she lifted a foot, her soaked pajamas dragged and chilled her further. Her hands were numb, but she kept them balled under her armpits to save what heat she could. Breathing was work. Each inhale stabbed her throat, and each exhale came ragged and shallow. The storm's voice was everywhere, moaning through fence wire, whistling past her ears until she could hardly hear her own heartbeat. She stumbled and fell forward, catching herself with her forearms. The snow burned as it soaked her sleeves and then turned them to boards of ice. She pushed up clumsily, fighting the urge to cry out. Somewhere behind her, faint and far, the house lights might have been glowing, but she didn't dare look back again. She told herself the woods would be better. The trees would break the wind, at least a little. She could get behind a trunk and think, breathe, maybe wait until morning. It was a child's plan, desperate and thin, but it was something. The dark edge of the forest drew closer by inches. Shapes resolved out of the swirling storm, black trunks rising like tall, silent watchers. She had never been here at night, and the sight frightened her almost as much as the cold. But the screaming and the slammed door were behind her, and she couldn't make herself turn toward them. The hush under the first branches promised at least relief from the endless wind. She pushed harder. The ground dipped and her feet tangled in hidden roots beneath the snow. She went down again, this time rolling onto her side, and lying there for a long beat, gasping. Snow found its way under her collar and down her spine, a sharp, wet line of misery. She sat up and brushed at it with stiff fingers that no longer felt like hers. The woods were closer now. She could see individual limbs shaking under the burden of ice, could smell the faint resin of pine. A few steps more. Inside the tree line, the world changed. The wind still hissed overhead, but the trunks blocked the worst of it. Snow fell more gently, and sound dulled to a softer hush. She leaned against the first tree she reached, cheek pressed to its rough bark, breathing shallow but grateful. Her chest hurt from cold air. It felt a little safer here, though the shadows were deep and the dark seemed to move. She looked back once. Nothing but white beyond, featureless and cruel. The house was gone, and so was the last of its yelling. She tried to stand straighter, but her legs trembled with exhaustion. She could not feel her feet at all now. They might have been blocks of wood. Her teeth chattered violently, each clack echoing loud in the stillness under the branches. It frightened her how empty she felt. Not sad exactly, just hollow and small, like a candle blown out. She wrapped her arms tighter, wishing for Bear, wishing for anyone, and fought the urge to sink to the snow and stop. Above her, a branch groaned under its weight and dropped a clump of snow onto her shoulder. She startled, then blinked up. The trees looked endless, stretching black against a sky gone gray with stormlight. A faint rustle somewhere deeper in the woods made her heart lurch. Animal, wind, something unknown. She was too cold to run, too tired to think clearly, but some instinct told her to move, keep moving, never let stillness take hold. She pushed away from the trunk and stepped farther in, shadows swallowing her small figure. Behind her the storm howled over the open fields, but in here there was a muffled quiet, eerie and almost gentle. Her footprints marked a shaky path in the yard into the dark. A tiny trail swallowed nearly as fast as she made it. She didn't know where she was going, only that forward was all that existed now. At first she thought it was the wind shifting again, the long, hollow note that rose and fell between the trees. But the sound came back sharper, closer, and her breath caught. It was low and rough, like something alive pushing through the night. She turned in a slow, clumsy circle, searching the tangle of trunks. Snow whispered off branches above her, but nothing moved below. Then, just as she thought she'd imagined it, a single bark cut through the stillness. It was a deep, chesty sound, half muffled by the storm but unmistakable. Her heart leapt painfully. Bear! Her own voice cracked and vanished in the cold air. Another bark answered, this one closer, urgent and rough. She took a stumbling step toward the sound, snow squealing under her bare feet. The darkness ahead shifted and then parted. Something large and dark came bounding between the trees, scattering powder with each stride. Bear looked bigger than she remembered, a thick shape against the white, his coat dusted with snow, eyes catching what little light the night offered. For one heartbeat she froze, unsure if it was really him. But then he let out a low, throaty whine that was pure recognition and shoved his cold nose into her shaking hands. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his neck, sobbing in relief so raw it hurt her throat. His fur was wet and clumped but radiated a faint, living warmth that seemed impossible in all this cold. He was panting hard, sides heaving, and she felt the tremor of muscles under her palms. The old shepherd mix must have broken free. She could picture the chain scraping concrete as he lunged until something gave way. She buried her face against his neck and tried to stop shaking. Bear whined again and pressed into her, then stepped back and looked behind them, nose high, ears pricked. When she didn't move, he came back, bumped her shoulder with his head, and whined louder. "You came," she whispered, teeth knocking together. The sound of her own voice was strange. Small. Bear pawed at the snow, circled her once, then nudged again, insistent now. It felt like language. He was telling her to get up to follow. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. The dog pushed against her, steadying her enough to rise. Once she was upright, he stepped forward into the trees and looked back, tail flicking in short, impatient sweeps. She followed, because there was nothing else to do, and because he was here and warm and sure of something when she was sure of nothing. The storm muffled itself under the canopy, but the cold was still vicious. Each step felt heavier than the last. Bear moved ahead, forging a path through the drifts, then doubled back to circle her when she faltered. At one point she stumbled and went down again. Instantly he was there, paw on her arm, whining, licking her face until she forced herself back up. His breath steamed in the air like hers. Two small lives pushing forward against a world gone white. Somewhere behind them was a house and the locked door, but it no longer mattered. Ahead, Bear seemed to know a way, or at least believed there was one. She tried to think of nothing but the dark shape moving just ahead of her knees, the flick of his tail, the little trail he carved. She could hear him panting, a rough, steady rhythm, and she fixed on that sound like a rope pulling her forward. Snow fell softer now, or maybe she was just past caring. The cold was still knives, but under her palm when she touched them there was life, and that was enough to keep walking. The trees thickened as they moved, the storm losing some of its teeth under the tall trunks. Lila could hardly feel her hands now, but the shaking had steadied into something mechanical, the way her body fought without asking her permission. Bear stayed just ahead for a few steps, then wheeled back and circled her, tail sweeping a crescent in the snow. He bumped her hip with his shoulder, solid enough to make her take another step when she might have stopped. The old shepherd's breath came in short white clouds, ears swiveling to every snap of branch, every whisper of wind. She realized he was not just leading. He was shielding, cutting the cold for her with his own body. When she slowed, he cut in front and pressed his broad side to her legs until she shuffled forward again. When she stumbled, he came from behind and nudged her lower back, insistent but gentle, the way he used to herd wayward hens in summer. His coat was damp but warm under her palm when she steadied herself against him. Each time she touched him, the world felt less empty. They found a little pocket between fallen logs where the snow wasn't as deep, and Bear steered her there, circling tight and scraping at the ground until there was less snow for her to stand on. He leaned into her then, big head under her arm, pushing warmth into her trembling side. For a moment she let herself sink down, knees giving way, but he whined low and sharp and nosed her chin until she lifted it. His eyes caught a flicker of light from somewhere unseen and glowed amber, steady and demanding. She felt him telling her, "Not here, not yet, get up." She tried to answer and managed only a whisper, cracked and hoarse. "I'm so cold." The sound of her own voice frightened her. It was smaller than she remembered. Bear whined again, a softer note this time, then turned and started forward slowly, looking back over his shoulder until she moved. When she tripped, he circled behind and nudged until she was upright again. The rhythm of his care was almost like breathing. Forward, return, press, encourage. They wove deeper among the trees, the night quieter but no less bitter. Branches overhead cracked and dropped snow in muffled thumps. Once, something darted across the path, maybe a rabbit, and Bear froze, hackles rising, before deciding the threat was nothing. Then back to Lila, nose against her hand. She clung to him, her fingers buried in the ruff of his neck, grateful for fur and heartbeat. It was strange to see him like this. At home, he was old Bear, sleepy by the stove, slow to rise, limping a little on frosty mornings. Now he was fierce and young again, tail high, chest out, each movement sharp and full of purpose. His age fell away in the face of her need. She remembered summer days by the creek, throwing sticks he refused to fetch, his happy panting. Now that same dog moved with quiet authority, a protector pulled awake by danger. She felt time differently here. Each step a tiny victory, each breath another chance. The cold still knifed at her skin, but where Bear brushed her legs, warmth lingered for a moment longer than before. The woods felt less like a trap and more like shelter, because he was part of them and he was with her. She followed his tail's slow sweep and listened for the low rumble in his chest that came whenever the wind gusted too hard, as if he were warning the night itself to keep its distance. They paused under a leaning pine, its boughs heavy and shielding. Bear pressed his whole body along her side now, a living barrier against the wind's reach. He licked the salt of frozen tears from her cheek, then turned back toward the dark, ears pricked. When she swayed with exhaustion, he barked once. Not loud, just enough to break the spell of stillness creeping over her. She startled and moved again, and that seemed to satisfy him. The world was still endless white beyond these trees, but inside the small orbit of fur and breath and steady eyes, there was hope enough to keep going. Bear knew no maps, no plans, but he knew her and he knew forward. Each time she thought she couldn't, he reminded her with a nudge, a lean, a warm shoulder. And somehow that was enough. Snow sifted down in a quiet haze now. Not the blinding assault had been in the open field, but still enough to blur everything past a few steps. Lila kept her head low and one hand tangled in Bear's thick ruff, letting him pull her through the drifts that clung stubbornly to her legs. Her toes no longer hurt. They had gone past pain to something hollow and frightening. But she moved because Bear moved. Each time he stopped, she stopped, swaying and blinking against the dark. Each time he started again, she followed without question, trusting that he knew something she didn't. He would pause every dozen paces or so, nose up, sides heaving with heavy breaths. His ears swiveled, catching sounds she couldn't hear. The creak of ice on a branch, the distant hush of the highway, maybe even the memory of warmth carried faint on the wind. Then he'd lower his head and sniff the snow in long, deliberate passes before stepping forward with quiet certainty. Watching him work filled her with a fragile, flickering hope. This was more than wandering. It felt like a search. The woods around them had their own sounds. Snow sliding from a limb, the soft cracking of frozen bark, once the echo of an owl's call deep and far away. Otherwise, it was just their breathing and the small crunch of her feet behind his heavier ones. She tried to place her steps inside his tracks, the prints wide and steady compared to her own stumbling trail. It made her feel less small somehow, walking where he had already tested the ground. Time blurred. The night seemed to stretch forever, no beginning and no end, just cold and movement. She thought about turning back, but there was no back. The storm had erased every sign of where she'd come from. She wanted to ask Bear where they were going, but knew he couldn't answer. So she whispered anyway, voice cracked and papery. "Do you know?" He glanced over his shoulder at the sound, eyes catching what little light there was, and gave a low rumble that wasn't quite a bark. Then he pressed on. Once he led her to a fallen tree and nosed at the space underneath, testing it. She crouched beside him and felt a moment's shelter from the wind, but after only a few breaths he pulled away, unwilling to stop. He shook snow from his coat, showering her in fine white powder, then sniffed the air and headed off on a new line. She followed again, teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. They crossed a shallow gully where the snow thinned, and the ground felt firmer beneath. She stumbled halfway down the slope, and Bear came scrambling back to push at her with his shoulder until she climbed out. She clung to his fur until they were on level ground again. Somewhere far off, faint but real, she thought she saw a glimmer, maybe a light, maybe her freezing mind playing tricks. Bear saw something too. He froze, head high, tail stiff, then started forward with renewed purpose. She didn't know if it was hope or instinct, but she let it pull her. Every so often he would stop again and look back, checking her progress. Each time his eyes found hers, some quiet thread stretched between them and held her upright. She was so tired she could hardly think. But following him felt simple. Step where he steps, breathe when he breathes. When she fell a second time, he barked sharply, one deep sound that startled her awake enough to crawl up and keep moving. The snow was softer here, less wind-driven. She could hear the faint whisper of water somewhere. A creek, maybe, though frozen. Bear angled toward it, nose working fast, then veered again as if deciding better. She realized he was making choices constantly, sensing some direction beyond her understanding. He was old and half-lame some days, but out here he was wild and sure, connected to something she couldn't name. She lost track of distance and time until the woods began to thin just enough for a paler stretch of sky to show through. Bear stopped then, chest heaving, and looked back at her with that same fierce, steady gaze. She reached him and sank against his side, too weak to stand for a moment, and he let her lean there, but kept his head turned forward, alert, searching. In the deep dark of the forest, surrounded by cold and silence, she felt the first time that maybe they weren't lost at all. Maybe Bear was leading them somewhere, and all she had to do was keep following his tracks. The stillness came on so suddenly it frightened her more than the wind ever had. The storm seemed to pause, the flakes falling slower, and the silence that followed felt heavy and strange. Her body wanted to stop with it. She swayed and nearly sat down without thinking, legs folding under their own weight. The ground here was level, and the idea of sinking into the snow and letting everything go quiet was dangerously comforting. Her chest ached from breathing cold air. She couldn't feel her feet at all anymore, only dull lumps at the ends of her legs. Her lips felt thick and rubbery when she tried to swallow. She sank to her knees, exhausted beyond sense. The snow came up to her waist now and made a soft hollow when she fell. It felt almost like a bed. She leaned sideways until her shoulder touched the ground. The cold bit her skin, but in a faraway way, less sharp than before, almost gentle. Maybe she could just rest for a little while. She thought of blankets, of the couch by the stove, of how heavy her eyes felt. She let them close for a moment. A wet, rasping sound shocked her back, Bear's tongue rough against her numb hands. She flinched and opened her eyes to find him standing over her, face inches from hers, breath steaming. He licked again, urgent, hot against her freezing fingers. Then he barked, loud and sharp in the hollow of trees, a single sound meant to wake. She startled upright, and the cold rushed back with vengeance, stabbing her skin, and she gasped hard. Bear barked again and shoved his head under her arm, levering her upward until she was sitting instead of lying. She tried to say his name, but her voice came out as a cracked whisper. He didn't wait for words. He nosed her cheek, then her shoulder, then tugged lightly at the sleeve of her pajama top with his teeth. She understood. Up, move, don't stop. She pushed with weak arms, stumbled to her knees. Bear stayed close, leaning into her side until she was standing again. The second she was upright, he circled once, brushing against her legs to keep her steady. She wanted to cry, not out of sadness, but out of some deep, aching gratitude and terror. But even the tears wouldn't come. Her face felt too stiff. She put both hands on his back and let him pull her forward a few steps. Her breath sawed in and out, each inhale a knife, each exhale ragged white smoke. Bear kept glancing up at her, ears back, tail low but wagging with small impatient flicks. When she faltered again, he jumped lightly and planted both front paws against her thighs, jarring her enough to move. The cold no longer screamed. It whispered now, a sly, sleepy voice telling her she was too small to fight. She felt in the way her thoughts dulled, how easy it was to stop caring. But Bear refused. He nudged, licked, barked sharp when her knees buckled, and pressed his body along hers until she moved again. Each time he touched her, warmth passed like a tiny spark she clung to. They trudged forward together, slow and uneven but alive. She tried to focus on the sound of his breathing, harsh and fast, but steady. Her own matched his until it felt like they shared one breath between them. He stopped often to test the air, but every time she sagged, he came back instantly, driving her on with nose and shoulder and the insistent scrape of claws through snow. Once she stumbled so hard she nearly fell face first. Bear darted in front and braced himself, letting her catch his scruff. For a moment she hung there, forehead pressed his fur, eyes closed, and the heat of him sank deep enough to bring a flicker of strength back. She whispered, "Good boy," though the words were slurred and small. His ears twitched, but he didn't pause. The night stretched on, endless and black, but she moved because he moved. When her knees trembled and the thought of lying down sang louder than anything else, Bear would not let her. He stayed close and alive and insistent, as if his whole old body had been built for this one job. To keep her heart beating, to keep her going until something better than this cold found them. The wood seemed endless, one dark trunk after another rising out of snow like sentinels that had been standing for centuries. Lila's legs barely obeyed her anymore. Each step felt borrowed, her body running on something other than strength, maybe just stubbornness or the Bear kept lending her. She didn't look ahead much. She kept her eyes on the fur between her fingers, the uneven sway of his back as he pushed through drifts. Then, almost by accident, she lifted her head and caught it, a flicker that wasn't snow or moonlight, something warmer, softer, alive. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. The storm had teased her before with phantom shapes, the way shadows and snow combined into illusions of cabins or fences that vanished when she blinked. But this was different. It glowed amber, faint but steady, pulsing like a breath through the white. She squinted, rubbed at her lashes crusted with ice, and the light was still there. One light, then two, blurred together. A house maybe, or a lamp on a road. The sight was so out of place that it stole her breath more than the cold ever had. Bear stopped suddenly, nose up, body rigid. His ears twitched, and his whole frame seemed to point toward the glow. He let out a low sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whine. Something caught between them, and turned his head toward Lila. His eyes reflected the faint light, amber and amber, as if to say he had seen it too. She nodded without thinking, as though he had asked her, and stumbled forward. He pushed against her side to keep her steady, then darted ahead and stopped again, always making sure she followed. The light grew clearer the more she blinked at it. It looked far, farther than her body wanted to carry her, but Bear would not let her stop. He pressed at her legs until she moved again, guided her through a break in the trees, angled her away from hollows where the snow lay deepest. Each time she faltered, he came back, leaned into her with steady insistence, then turned his head toward the glow like a compass fixed to true north. Her thoughts tangled as she walked. Maybe it wasn't a house. Maybe it was the sky playing with her, or headlights on some distant road that would vanish if she got too close. But the light stayed, and even when snow swirled thickest, she could still see it pulsing faint and warm ahead. The hope of it became stronger than her exhaustion, something to focus on besides the scream of wind and the numbness spreading through her limbs. Bear barked once, sharp and short, and then set off a faster pace, forcing her to stumble run after him. The snow tore at her legs, but she didn't dare lose him, didn't dare lose the light. Her chest burned with every breath, but she clung to the vision ahead. The glow began to stretch taller, resolving into something she recognized at last. A window, maybe two, golden squares against a black and white world. A house. It had to be. Tears stung her eyes again, though they froze almost instantly, making her lashes stick. She barely noticed. The lights were real, and Bear knew it too. His tail flicked low but quick, his body moving with urgency she hadn't seen before. He looked back once as if to urge her faster, then pressed forward again, never straying from the line that would take them there. The snow still clawed at her feet, still pulled her down with each step, but the sight of those faint amber windows held her upright. She whispered a broken word, not even sure if it was please or home, and Bear pushed her harder toward it, fierce and unrelenting. Somewhere ahead, Warmth waited, and together they stumbled toward it through the storm. The golden squares of light bobbed faintly ahead, but distance in a storm is a trickster. Every step Lila took seemed to stretch the space rather than shrink it. Her legs had long since gone from numb to trembling. She stumbled more often, catching herself against Bear's back, each time feeling how solid and alive he still was. But the warmth she had borrowed from him was fading. The cold was not sharp anymore. It was dull and heavy, crawling deep and making her slow. She didn't notice when the ground changed, a hidden dip beneath the snow. Her foot slid into emptiness, and suddenly her whole body pitched forward. She hit face first, the impact sending a jolt through her chest and knocking the thin breath out of her. Snow filled her mouth and nose. She coughed, but the air burned too cold to clear it all. For a few seconds, she just lay there, stunned, cheek pressed to ice, the faint warmth of movement draining fast. Bear's body slammed against her side almost immediately. His front paws landed on her shoulder and chest, not enough to hurt, but enough to push life back in. He whined low and frantic, the sound vibrating right into her bones. She tried to push herself up, but her arms felt impossibly heavy. He licked her cheek in rough, desperate strokes, then her hands, his tongue rasping over the skin as if to pull her back. She whispered his name, or maybe just air. She couldn't tell if it made a sound. Bear didn't stop. He circled her once, plowing snow away with his chest, then returned and shoved his head under her arm, trying to lever her upright. She made it to her elbows, but that was all. Her strength dissolved as soon as she tried to rise. He backed up and barked once, a deep, booming call that startled even her sluggish mind. When she didn't respond, he did it again, louder this time, then tipped his muzzle upward and let out a sound that cut the night wide open. It wasn't the quick, sharp bark she'd heard before. It was long and rolling, a call pulled from deep inside, rising into the storm until it seemed bigger than both of them. The sound startled her awake a little. She had never heard him howl like that. The noise carried far, echoing through the woods, breaking the heavy hush. Bear howled again, pausing only to nose at her, licking snow from her face, then throwing his voice upward once more. Between the echoes came silence, deep but listening. Bear's body was rigid now, tail low but vibrating with urgency. He howled again, so long she could feel it in her chest. Each time he finished, he bent to her, nudged and pawed, unwilling to let her sink back down. Somewhere inside her numb fog, a flicker of understanding. He was calling someone, anyone. The night shifted subtly after the second howl, not warmer, but alive in a new way. Lila thought she heard something answer far off, but it could have been the wind changing. Still, Bear seemed to hear something. He barked sharply twice, and then pressed into her side again, determined to keep her from curling up. She tried once more to move and managed to roll onto her knees. The effort left her shaking, but Bear was instantly there, shoulder against her ribs, steadying her until she could wobble to her feet. She clung to his fur, leaning so hard he nearly stumbled under her weight, but he held. When she swayed dangerously, he howled once more, a desperate, ragged sound that tore out into the darkness and refused to be lost. Then he turned his head toward the far-off glow and gave a low, urging grunt. Even half delirious, she understood. Forward. They staggered on together. She could feel how tired he was now, his breathing rough, his steps slower, but he kept a half step ahead, looking back constantly. The world had shrunk to two living hearts, and the echo of his call still hanging somewhere unseen. In the white emptiness, that howl was a lifeline, thrown into the night in case anyone, anywhere was listening. The first howl had ripped out a Bear like something primal, echoing to the black trees and across the open fields until it was swallowed by wind. For a moment, nothing came back but the sound of snow hissing sideways and the lonely creak of ice shifting on branches. Lila stirred weakly where she lay half buried. A tiny shudder that made the dog push his nose harder against her shoulder, urging her not to drift away. He drew in the air again, nostrils wide, chest swelling, and then threw another cry into the night, long, desperate, reaching. This time, after a stretch of silence so deep it hurt, something changed. From somewhere far but real, a faint answering bark floated back. It was thin and carried strangely on the wind, but it was enough. Bear froze, ears sharp, whole body taut with listening. He gave a low whine and looked down at the girl, as if to say, someone heard. Lila's eyelids fluttered, barely conscious, but a whisper sound left her. Maybe his name, maybe just breath. Bear barked again, shorter, urgent. Another bark answered, stronger now, followed by the faint crunch of something moving over snow. Then, as if the night itself cracked open, a square of light flickered far away, a porch lamp flaring to life, cutting a golden window into the storm. It was distant, a faint smudge between trees, but it was there. Bear whined once more, tail trembling though not wagging, then lifted his head and howled again with all the force left in his chest. Inside that warm halo of light, a shape moved. The door must have swung open because a brighter spill of yellow cut through the swirling white. Bear barked sharp and fast, 3 times, then stood, planting his paws deep as a staking claim to this small patch of world until help arrived. The answering sound came clearer now. Another dog's voice, quicker and closer, followed by the unmistakable echo of boots on a porch. Bear's ears flicked, measuring distance, but he stayed put beside Lila, one forepaw set protectively across her hip. Wind clawed at them both, but the night felt subtly different. Something alive and human was awake out there now. Bear pressed his muzzle to the girl's cheek and licked away the tiny crust of ice near her mouth, then swung back toward the light. He barked again, shorter this time, like a beacon. The answering bark came louder, joined by what could have been a shout. Faint but human. Lila stirred faintly at the sound, eyes fluttering. Her hand twitched in the air, searching and finding his fur. He leaned closer, giving her something to hold on to, and barked one last time. This time, the answer came quick and sure, a woman's voice calling in the dark, the slam of a door behind her, the sharper crunch of boots determined rather than curious. Bear lowered his head beside Lila's again, but his body trembled with some new energy. Not panic, not cold, something like hope. The night that had swallowed them whole was sending something back now. Sound, light, and the promise of footsteps finding their way through the storm. He nosed the girl once more, a silent command to hold on just a little longer, then fixed his gaze on the growing glow between the trees and waited. The night on the far edge of the woods was still until the sound reached it, a cry not meant for hunting or warning, but something raw, pulled from the chest of an animal that refused to give up. Mrs. Ellery sat half-dozing in the chair by her front window, a quilt around her shoulders and the low hiss of the propane heater keeping back the cold. She had lived alone for a long time. The rhythms of the place were familiar enough that any sound not belonging to the house woke her quickly. When the first howl cut through the wind, she straightened, unsure she had dreamed it. A moment passed, just the ticking of the heater and the faint groan of winter shifting in the walls. Then the howl came again, closer this time, long and quivering and full of something that made her throat tighten. She was on her feet before she knew it, setting the quilt aside and stepping to the window. Snow drifted hard under the porch light, nothing visible beyond it. But her own shepherd mix, old Tansy, lifted her head from the rug and gave a sharp, questioning bark, and that was enough to send Mrs. Ellery moving fast. She pulled on her boots without socks, tugged her long winter coat over the thin robe, and jammed a knit cap down over hair still loose from sleep. The flashlight sat on the hook by the door, fully charged because she always kept it that way. She snapped it on, and the beam cut a yellow-white cone through the storm. For a moment she hesitated, glancing back at the warm room, but another faint cry, a dog's desperate, broken yelp, drifted in and decided the matter. She stepped outside, pulling the door tight behind her. The air hit like a wall, cold and immediate, but she was already moving. Snow squealed under her boots, light bouncing off flakes that seemed to fall upward as much as down. She swept the beam slowly, searching for movement, a shape, anything. Tansy barked once from inside, muffled but urgent. Somewhere deeper in the trees, an answering bark came. Not Tansy's, not any neighbor she knew. She frowned, tightened the coat around her, and started toward the tree line. The wind tried to push her back, but she leaned forward and trudged on, keeping the flashlight low, so the beam didn't blind her with reflected snow. The night was alive now with small sounds, branches clacking under their ice, the occasional distant creak of wood. And again the howl she'd first heard, rising and cutting off mid-breath, followed by a sharper bark. It sounded wrong and desperate, nothing like the idle noise dogs make to moon. She picked up her pace, muttering little encouragements to herself the way she always had when the world went dark and strange. Almost there, just a look. See what's what? Her breath fogged and froze on the edge of her scarf. The flashlight beam caught on broken branches and swirling flakes until, just for a heartbeat, it flashed off eyes, 2 amber sparks low to the ground. She stopped short, heart hammering, until the shape resolved. A dog, big and shaggy, half snowed over but alive and staring straight at her. It was Bear. She recognized him from the farmhouse down the lane, old but strong still, with a heavy shepherd coat and wise eyes. He barked once when her light found him, then turned back, whining to the darkness behind him. She swung the flashlight there and saw a small collapsed shape in the snow, so slight she almost missed it. A child. Her stomach dropped. "God above," she breathed, already moving. Bear let her pass but stayed close, circling the little body and whining low. She dropped to her knees, hands fumbling out of her gloves to check for warmth, breath, anything. The girl stirred faintly and a ragged cry escaped her lips, more whimper than word. "It's okay, baby, I've got you," Mrs. Ellery said, voice shaking but sure. She shrugged out of her coat and wrapped it around the child's narrow shoulders, tucking the edges under the trap what little heat remained. Bear nosed at the girl's cheek, then looked up at Mrs. Ellery as if to say hurry. She gathered the child into her arms, lighter than she expected, frighteningly light, and turned back toward the faint glow of her porch light through the trees. "Come on then," she said softly to the dog. Bear fell beside her instantly, shoulder brushing her leg, watchful and silent now, except for one low, steady rumble that seemed to guide them all the way back. The beam of the flashlight wavered across the uneven snow as Mrs. Ellery closed the last stretch between her and the small, still shape on the ground. For an instant she feared she was too late. The child lay curled awkwardly, face half buried in the drift, tiny shoulders quivering only faintly, if at all. But before panic could settle, the dog stepped sideways into her light, body rigid, eyes fixed on her with a strange mixture of warning and pleading. She stopped, breath pluming fast, forcing herself to stay calm. "It's okay," she murmured, voice low and steady the way one talks to skittish animals. The dog, Bear, yes, she was sure now, let out a single huff, a sound that was not quite a growl, not quite relief. He kept his stance between her and the child, head lowered, tail stiff but not lifted high in aggression, a protector deciding if she was friend or threat. Mrs. Ellery lowered herself slowly to one knee, letting the flashlight fall to the crook of her arm so both hands were visible and empty. "Hey there, good boy," she whispered, careful not to move closer yet. "You've done just right. Brave boy." The wind hissed in the trees, but the night itself felt paused, waiting to see what would happen. Bear's eyes never left her face, but something softened in them when she spoke. He sniffed the air, then looked down at the child and back to her, a silent plea. She inched forward, keeping her gaze low and her hands loose. Bear didn't retreat, but the taut line of his body eased fractionally. When she was within reach, she paused again and extended a hand just above the snow, palm turned down. "Let me see her, sweetheart," she coaxed, half to the dog and half to the still bundle of girl. Bear let out a quiet sound, deep in his chest, and then stepped aside just enough that she could reach Lila. Mrs. Ellery's heart clenched when her fingers touched the child's shoulder. The fabric of the thin pajamas was soaked and stiff with ice. She brushed snow from the girl's face and saw blue lips, lashes clotted with frozen tears. "Oh, honey," she breathed, all the careful distance gone in a rush of protectiveness. "We've got you now." The girl's eyes fluttered but didn't fully open. A sound escaped her, weak and broken, somewhere between sob and sigh. Moving slowly so as not to startle Bear, Mrs. Ellery shrugged out her coat and wrapped it around the small body, pulling the hood up to cover the damp head. She could feel the alarming lightness of the child as she lifted her, nothing but cold bones and soaked cloth in her arms. "I've got you," she said again, whispering into the little ear just visible beneath tangled hair. "You're safe, sweetheart. We're going to get warm." Bear circled once, close enough that his fur brushed her boots, but the tension had drained from him. His head dropped low, and he sniffed at Lila's cheek, gave one small lick, and then looked up at Mrs. Ellery again, trust quietly offered. She nodded at him as if they'd struck a pact. "Come on, hero," she murmured. Turning back toward the thin line of her porch light, she adjusted the child's weight against her chest. The girl was frighteningly limp, but a faint breath warmed the inside of the coat. Bear moved at her side, so close she could feel the heat of him through her robe. Each time she stumbled, he slowed, until she found footing. The woods no longer felt empty. There were 3 of them now, moving together, fragile but alive. Snow hissed down, but seemed less cruel with company. The light ahead glowed a little stronger as they broke from the trees into the open yard. Mrs. Ellery clutched the child tighter, whispering again and again, words of comfort, of home, of warmth. Behind her, Bear stayed silent except for his heavy panting, but his watchful presence filled the night more surely than any lamp. And though her arms ached and the cold bit hard, she felt a rising certainty with each step. They were going to make it back. The wind found them again the moment the trees thinned, rushing into the clearing like something alive and angry. Snow whipped sideways across the open stretch, erasing the faint path they'd just made. Mrs. Ellery tightened her hold on the child, pulling the coat close around the small body and tucking the edges under her chin. The weight felt both fragile and fierce. Lila was light enough to scare her, but warm enough still to keep her moving fast. She shifted the flashlight to her other hand, angling its beam toward the faint glow of her own porch lamp. No longer just a speck, but a real place waiting in the dark. Bear slipped out ahead of them and then circled back, unwilling to get too far from the pair. His head was low, nose cutting through the air, tail sweeping slow arcs across the snow behind him. Now and then he glanced up at her face, checking, reading her like he had read the night. Each time she met his eyes, he gave a little push of energy forward, trotting ahead just far enough to break trail before turning back to be sure she followed. Every few steps Mrs. Ellery spoke softly, to herself, to the girl, to the dog, words without plan but full of warmth. Almost there now. Warm fire, you'll see. Brave boy, good boy. Hang on, sweetheart. Her voice shook from cold but carried enough steadiness to keep her own fear from winning. The girl stirred slightly, head shifting against her shoulder, a small whimper escaping. Relief shot through her. Sound meant life, meant she hadn't been too late. She bent her face to the damp hair and whispered, "I know, honey, just a little more." The ground was uneven, and twice she stumbled, catching herself before she could fall. Bear was there each time, pressing his shoulder against her leg, steady and solid despite his own labored breathing. Snow clung to his fur in icy clumps, but he didn't stop to shake them off. His entire attention seemed fixed on clearing the way back to light and heat. Wind clawed at her face, turning each breath into sharp, cold knives. She pulled the scarf higher and bent low over the girl to shield her from the worst of it. Her arms ached from carrying the weight, but adrenaline and something deeper, the old instinct to protect, kept her strong. Step after step, she pushed forward, eyes never leaving the golden glow ahead. At last the farmhouse fence loomed out of the storm, its rails heavy with white. Bear slowed just enough to sniff and check, then darted through a gap where the snow wasn't as deep. Mrs. Ellery followed, trudging awkwardly, but refusing to stop. Each foot closer made the porch light seem warmer, more alive. It spilled across the yard now, turning swirling flakes into gold flecks. When her boots hit the first shovel patch near the steps, the relief was so fierce it almost buckled her knees. She climbed carefully, breath ragged, clutching the girl as if she might vanish if held too loose. Bear bounded up first, then turned back, standing tall and watchful as she fumbled the knob with chill fingers. Warmth struck her like a wave when the door opened. The propane heater's breath, the faint scent of coffee and wool blankets, all of it rushed out to meet them. She didn't pause. She carried Lila straight inside, shutting the door behind with a hard shoulder push and the solid click of the latch. Bear slipped in right on her heels without waiting for invitation. A dark, wet shadow that brought the wild night inside. For a long moment she just stood there in the entry, shaking from effort and cold, staring down at the small face tucked against her shoulder. Alive, eyes closed but breathing shallow and steady. She eased the coat back a little to check and felt the faint but real warmth there. Bear sat heavily on the rug, chest heaving, ice melting into small puddles around his paws, gaze fixed on the girl with quiet, unrelenting devotion. "You did good," she said aloud, and didn't know if she meant the words of the dog or herself or the tiny life in her arms. Maybe all three. Then she moved again, toward heat, toward safety, toward whatever came next, with a sense that the worst of the night had been held back, not by luck, but by fur and courage in a neighbor's listening heart. The kitchen woke as soon as they stepped in, light spilling across the linoleum, heat rolling up from the little propane heater by the table. Mrs. Ellery shut the door hard and threw the bolt, shutting out the roar of the storm until only a muffled hiss remained beyond the windows. The sudden quiet was so profound it made her ears ring. She stood a moment just breathing, letting the weight of the night slide from her shoulders enough to focus. Then she moved, steady and purposeful. She set the girl down on the big wooden bench built into the corner nook, careful not to jostle her too much. Lila slumped against the wall, eyes half-lidded but open enough now to track the room. Mrs. Ellery crouched and touched her face, worried at the pale blue tinge of her lips. "Stay with me, honey," she said softly. "We're warm now. You're safe." The child's breath was shallow but there. A small sigh fogged the cold air still clinging to her. Bear dropped onto the braided rug just a few feet away, ribs moving fast, steam rising off his back. He didn't shake off the snow. He just lay there, eyes fixed on the girl, one paw extended as if to reach her. His whole body hummed with exhausted alertness. Tired beyond measure, but unwilling to stop watching. Mrs. Ellery peeled off her own wet coat, tossed it aside, then gently began working at the sodden pajamas clinging to the child's legs. "Let's get these off before they freeze harder." Her voice was brisk but tender. She peeled away the icy fabric, revealing thin legs mottled red and white from cold. She rubbed them carefully with an old flannel towel warm from a heater, mindful not to burn the fragile skin. Lila whimpered once, but didn't resist. "Good girl," Mrs. Ellery murmured. "That's it. We'll get you warm." She slipped thick wool socks onto the tiny feet, talking all the while to keep both of them grounded. "Your toes will tingle. That's good. That means they're waking up." She layered an oversized sweatshirt over Lila's damp top, tucking it down until it swallowed her small frame, then wrapped her in a thick quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and soap. The transformation was slow but visible. A little color crept back into her cheeks. On the stove, an enamel pot waited from earlier, vegetable soup she'd made for herself hours before. She ladled some into a wide mug, the kind a child could hold with two hands, and carried it over. The steam drifted up like a promise. "Sip slow," she said, crouching low to help guide it to Lila's mouth. The first swallow brought a tiny, surprised shudder, then another. Mrs. Ellery smiled gently and let her drink. Bear finally shifted, rising stiffly to his feet. He padded closer, careful and quiet, and laid his chin on the bench edge near Lila's knee. She glanced at him, and her lips twitched into the faintest, cracked smile. One trembling hand slipped free from the quilt and found his head. Her fingers were clumsy but determined as they sank into his damp fur. He exhaled a long, low sigh and stayed there, eyes half closed but still vigilant. The room filled with small sounds. The ticking of the heater, the faint crackle of ice melting off boots and fur, the soft clink of spoon against mug. Outside, the wind still clawed at the walls, but it felt distant now, almost powerless against the warm circle they had made. Mrs. Ellery moved around quietly, stoking heat, refilling the mug, checking toes and fingers for sensation, but she never let the child feel alone. Each time Lila's eyes fluttered closed, she touched her shoulder lightly and coaxed them open again, anchoring her here. When the soup was gone and the socks no longer looked wet at the edges, Mrs. Ellery sat across them with her own cup of tea and studied the pair before her. Small girl swaddled in borrowed warmth, great old dog crouched like a sentry. "You're a hero," she whispered to Bear, and his tail swept the rug once in slow acknowledgement. Then, to Lila, quieter still, "You held on." For the first time all night, the child's chin lifted a fraction, and she whispered back, voice raw but alive, cold. Mrs. Ellery smiled through the sting in her eyes. "I know, sweetheart, but we're fixing that now." And she reached across, took the girl's small hand, still icy but not lifeless, and wrapped her own around it until warmth passed between them, steady and certain, as the storm howled helplessly outside. Mrs. Ellery moved quietly, but with the kind of focus that comes when fears burn itself down into action. The kitchen was a cocoon now, steam curling from the mug in Lila's hands, the heater humming low, the snow fog windows turning the night to a white blur. But safety was only partial. She knew hypothermia was sly, knew shock could steal a heartbeat in minutes. And there was more than cold here. The reason this little one had been in the woods at all. She looked at the girl's bowed head, then at Bear sprawled at her feet like a living wall, and felt the urgency press in. She reached for the old phone mounted on the wall, the coil cord stretching as she turned slightly to keep an eye on them. Her fingers, stiff with lingering cold, punched the numbers with care. The first call went to Sheriff's direct line, the one every longtime resident knew for emergencies that weren't car crashes but mattered all the same. "Walt," she said when a familiar voice answered, groggy but alert. "It's Alma Ellery. I've got a little girl here. She's half froze. Found her in my woods with the Carter's dog." Her words came clipped but sure. "Yes, the shepherd. Looks like she came from the farmhouse." She hesitated, watching Lila shrink at the mention of home. "She can't go back tonight, Walt. You come now. Bring a medic if you can." She listened a moment, nodded to herself. "Yes, I'll keep her warm. Hurry." When she hung up, Bear's head rose instantly, eyes tracking the sound. He seemed to sense the shift in the air, the next phase beginning. Lila stirred faintly, confusion in her half-lidded gaze. "Just talking to friends, honey," Mrs. Ellery said gently. "They're coming to help." The second call took a moment of digging. The paper list of numbers taped to the side of the fridge was faded, edges curled. She ran her thumb down it until she found the one for the on-call child services responder. The line rang long before someone answered, voice sleepy and professional. Mrs. Ellery gave her name, her address, the bare facts. "No, she can't go back there tonight. Not safe." "Yes, the sheriff's on his way." She answered the dry questions with a rising steel in her voice. "No, she's not alone. She's got the dog and me. But she needs placement, emergency, first thing." Another pause, then a tight thank you before she hung up. Bear had shifted closer to Lila in the meantime, chest pressed against her legs, as though he could hold her upright by will alone. His fur was damp, but he didn't care. Each time she swayed a little, his nose found her hand and kept her tethered. Mrs. Ellery felt the sight etch itself deep, this old dog refusing to stand down. Finally, she made the third call, the one she'd been hoping not to need. The volunteer medic on the night roster was only 3 houses away, but she dialed anyway. Better to warn than to surprise. "Tom? Alma? Bring your kit?" Child's half frozen. "Yes, breathing, drinking soup. Just want her eyes on her before she sleeps." She listened to his quick, no-nonsense response and let out a long breath. "Thank you, Tom. Drive careful." She set the receiver back in its cradle and for a moment just leaned against the counter, her pulse still racing though the danger was easing. Lila had slid lower into the quilt, but her eyes were open, faintly glazed but following the movement. Mrs. Ellery returned to her side at once, kneeling until their faces were level. "We've got help coming," she said softly. "You're not alone anymore." Bear shifted again, placing his head on the girl's knee and letting out a sigh so deep it rattled the floorboards. Mrs. Ellery reached over and ran a firm, grateful hand over his head, down the damp ruff of his neck. "You keep watch, big man," she murmured. He thumped his tail once, but didn't look away from Lila. Minutes passed like that, the child wrapped and held by borrowed warmth, the dog a sentinel, and the old house alive with small purposeful sounds. The kettle rattling softly as it reheated water, the creak of wood under shifting weight, the ticking clock on the wall. Each ring of the phone lines now seemed far away, replaced by a quiet vigil. Outside, somewhere down the lane, the faint crunch of tires on ice began to echo, headlights soon to cut through the storm. But inside, for this small moment, there was only the fragile safety they had built together, and the dog who refused to leave his post. The sound of tires on frozen gravel reached the house before the lights did. Mrs. Ellery felt in the floorboards a faint, deliberate vibration, and then saw the glow sweep across her front windows. Bear's head shot up, ears pricked, low rumble deep in his chest, but not yet a growl. Lila startled slightly under the quilt, eyes going wide and fearful, until Mrs. Ellery's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "It's okay," she whispered, leaning close enough that the girl could hear her over the humming heater. "It's help. Friends." She rose and crossed the kitchen slowly, giving the dog a quiet word as she went. Easy, boy. They're here for her. A knock came, firm but not hurried, and then the door opened with a careful push that sent a gust of cold air tumbling in. Deputy Walt Haynes stepped over the threshold, snow dusting his shoulders and the brim of his hat. He filled the doorway with his presence more than his size. Tall but not imposing, a kind of steady gravity wrapped in a gray beard and weathered parka. He shut the door behind him, stamping snow from his boots, and for a long beat said nothing at all. His eyes took in the room in a single slow sweep. The heater's glow, the child swaddled on the bench, the steaming mug on the table, and Bear crouched low but motionless at Lila's feet. The dog's tail was stiff, his body on guard but silent. Walt held his gaze there, not challenging, just letting the animal see him. Then, almost imperceptibly, he tipped his chin once. Bear did not relax, but the tension in the room shifted. Something had been acknowledged and accepted between man and dog. Walt moved closer, boots quiet on the worn linoleum. He didn't go straight to the girl. He took his time, setting his gloves on the table, nodding once to Mrs. Ellery. "Alma," he said, voice low and rough from the cold. "You got her warm?" "Working on it," she answered, just as quietly. "Soup, dry socks, blankets." "She's breathing steady. Fingers and toes pinking up." He gave a slow, approving nod, but his eyes went back to Lila, softening as they landed on her small face. He didn't speak to her yet. He just crouched a few feet away, getting low. So he wasn't towering over her. Bear watched each move, hackles not raised, but every muscle ready. Walt respected the space, not reaching out, just letting presence settle. "Hey there," he said after a moment, voice gentler now. "Name's Walt. I work with the sheriff's office." No questions yet. No talk of where she came from, or why. Just calm introduction, the kind that leaves room for breathing. Lila blinked at him but didn't answer. Her hand still clutched Bear's fur. Walt's gaze flicked to the dog again and back, a faint, understanding smile under the beard. "He's a good one," he said softly. "Smart to stick with you." Something in Lila's small shoulders eased a fraction. Not trust yet, but less flinch. Mrs. Ellery hovered near, watching carefully, ready to step in if needed. Walt didn't push. He took out a small flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed the beam not at her face but at his own palm first, gentle, so she wouldn't be afraid. Then he let the light skim over her cheeks, her nose, her fingers still tucked in the quilt, checking quietly without making her feel inspected. "Cold, huh?" he said simply. And when she gave the tiniest nod, he smiled again, a ghost of kindness in a weathered face. "You're safe here. We're going to keep it that way." Bear exhaled a long breath and lowered his chin to his paws. Not asleep, but conceding just a little. Walt glanced at Mrs. Ellery, unspoken gratitude in his eyes, and she answered with a small shake of her head, as if to say, "Don't thank me yet." Outside, another set of headlights swung into the drive. Probably Tom with the medic kit. Walt stood slowly, careful not to jolt the fragile calm. "More help coming," he said, this time to both child and dog. "But no one here is going to hurt you." The words settled into the kitchen with the warmth and the smell of soup, and though the storm still raged beyond the walls, for the first time since being cast into it, Lila's breathing slowed to something close to steady. The house had gone very still except for the small sounds that meant life was creeping back into the child. The heater hummed, the kettle clicked softly as it cooled on the back burner, and every now and then the old dog shifted on the rug, letting out a long sigh. Lila had drifted toward sleep soon after Walt's arrival, but not deep enough for anyone to leave her unwatched. Mrs. Ellery had guided her from a bench to the wide couch near the stove, tucking the quilt all the way around until only her face showed. The girl's lashes fluttered, and sometimes a tremor passed through her as warmth woke nerves long frozen. Bear lay along the floor just beneath, chin on his paws, eyes slitted but open, his whole body arranged to touch the couch's edge. Walt stood for a while by the door, shoulders broad but not imposing, letting the heat sink into his coat before he shrugged it off and hung it carefully on the back of a chair. He didn't speak until he was sure the girl had reached that fragile place where half-sleep dulled fear, but didn't shut her off from the room. Then he moved to the table and joined Mrs. Ellery, who had sat down at last with a mug between her palms, hands trembling just enough to make the tea ripple. She's breathing easy, he asked quietly. Mrs. Ellery nodded. Slow but steady. She took some soup. Body's coming back from the cold. She hesitated, glancing at the couch before continuing. Skin's a mess. I saw bruises. Old ones and new. Walt's jaw worked, but no sound came at first. He looked past her to the child, gaze softening for a heartbeat before the steel came back. You sure? He asked finally, voice even but tighter than before. I'm sure. Mrs. Ellery's voice was low but certain. Arms, ribs, places you don't get from just falling down. And the way she flinched when I said home. Walt sat back, the chair groaning under his weight. His hands closed slowly into fists on the tabletop, then open again as if he didn't want to bring the storm inside. I called dispatch. We'll file for protective hold tonight. She's not going back there. Mrs. Ellery exhaled, some of her tension slipping away. She reached a scratch behind Bear's ear where he lay within reach, and the dog shifted slightly but didn't take his eyes off the couch. He knew Walt. That dog, he broke free somehow. Led her out of those woods. Wouldn't let her drop. Walt followed her gaze, and something in his lined face softened again. Sometimes they know better than people, he said quietly. Then his brow furrowed deeper. Father's going to be trouble. You said voices shouting? Hours of it, she whispered. Enough to shake the house. He rubbed a hand over his beard and looked again at Lila. The sight of her small body curled under two big blankets seemed to deepen the lines around his mouth. No child should know that cold, he said, and though his voice stayed low, it carried weight like steel. No child should end up out there alone. They fell into silence for a time, listening to the gentle hiss of snow against the windows. Mrs. Ellery sipped tea and tried to keep her hands still. Walt kept his eyes on the doorway as though expecting it to burst open. But nothing came except the night, settling heavier outside. At last he spoke again, softer. You did right. Alma, calling me, keeping her alive till we got here. She and the dog did the hard part, she answered, eyes glistening but dry. I just listened. Walt gave the smallest nod, a promise tucked in the gesture. Then he rose and crossed the couch, crouching down until he was level with Bear's steady stare. He extended a hand, palm down and slow, and after a pause the dog sniffed it once and let out a low rumble that wasn't warning but tiredness. Walt left the hand there for a heartbeat, a quiet truce, then shifted his gaze to the sleeping girl. His eyes softened again, but his jaw stayed clenched, ready for whatever came next. When he returned to the table, his voice was business but laced with quiet anger. We'll keep her safe tonight. Tomorrow, I'll start the paperwork and the calls. Father'll be hearing from more than me. Mrs. Ellery only nodded, a long, slow breath leaving her. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small kitchen, a plan and a fragile circle of protection were taking shape. A tired neighbor, a steady deputy, and an old dog who refused to move an inch in the child he had carried through the dark. The kitchen had taken on that strange quiet of a place where something terrible has already happened, but safety is beginning to hold. The heater hummed low, pushing back the cold. The kettle murmured on a back burner, and a soft scent of tea and broth lingered in the air. Lila lay half buried in quilts on the couch, one thin hand still caught in Bear's heavy ruff. The dog had not closed his eyes once. Every small sound from the girl, a sigh, the faintest shift, pulled his head up instantly, ears twitching, body tensing, as if ready to guard again. Walt moved with deliberate calm, but the storm that had settled in his jaw hadn't eased. He poured himself coffee from the pot Mrs. Ellery had set back on the warmer, drank a swallow so black and hot it would have scalded anyone else, then reached for phone. His voice when he spoke was measured, not raised, but each word sounded as if it were being placed carefully where it would count. Dispatch, this is Haynes. At Ellery's place. I need a welfare check coded now. Juvenile, 8 years old, hypothermia risk, suspected neglect and abuse. A pause while the voice on the other end answered. His gaze flicked to the couch and softened, then hardened again. Affirmative. Emergency removal requested. Home unsafe. Confirmed physical indicators. I'll hold here until day's shift, but we'll need follow-up tonight. Copy. He listened, nodded once, then added quietly, Father present earlier, likely hostile. Keep it quiet on approach. His eyes went to Bear as the old dog stirred. Lila had whimpered in her sleep, a small sound like a broken bird. Bear raised his head sharply, nose pushing against the child's shoulder until she stilled. Walt watched that small moment with something close to reverence, and then turned back to the phone. "Dog stays with the girl," he said simply. "Protective asset." "Understood." A pause, then a faint smile without humor. "Yes, I know it's unusual. It's happening." He hung up and stood for a long beat, one hand still on the receiver, the other tightening briefly around his coffee mug. Mrs. Ellery didn't speak. She just watched him, knowing better than to interrupt while the weight of legal phrases and hard choices settled in the room. At last he exhaled and came back to the table, setting the mug down with quiet precision. "She's safe tonight," he said, voice low but full of a steady promise. "Paperwork started. State will take it from here, but no one's dragging her back there." Mrs. Ellery nodded slowly, relief flickering behind tired eyes. "Thank you." "It's the job," he answered, but the words didn't carry routine. They carried something personal, rooted deeper than duty. He looked over at Lila again, watching the small rise and fall of her chest. Bear met his gaze steadily, and Walt inclined his head just enough to acknowledge the strange partnership that had carried her this far. The coffee cooled beside him, but he didn't seem to notice. His focus stayed on the girl, on the room, on every small sound from outside where the storm still scraped against the siding. More headlights swept faint across the snow. The medic maybe, or another unit answering the quiet call for help. Walt didn't move toward the window yet. His first instinct was to stay close to the fragile piece here. Another soft whimper came from Lila, and Bear immediately lifted his head, nudging her side until she settled. Walt's shoulders eased just a little at the sight. "He's not letting go, is he?" he said quietly. "No," Mrs. Ellery replied, voice gentle. "Not until she knows she's safe." They let the silence stretch, broken only by the dog's breathing and the distant moan of winter across the fields. And somewhere in that stillness, amid the smell of coffee and the low hum of a house holding its own against the storm, resolve settled in. They would see this child through the night and beyond. Whatever cold had cast her out, warmth and watchfulness had claimed her now. The storm had eased but not stopped, just slowed enough that flakes drifted lazy and heavy instead of sideways knives. Walt's truck led the way down the unplowed lane, tires biting into ice-crusted ruts. The second cruiser, following close behind with its lights throwing slow, ghostly pulses of blue across the endless white. Each rotation of the beacon turned the night and field and tree line into a moving, silent kaleidoscope of light and shadow. In the passenger seat, Deputy Harris rode quiet, hands braced on the dash, eyes scanning the tree line the way a man does when he's not sure what waits. They had left Alma Ellery's house only after Tom the medic had checked Lila's vitals and tucked her deeper into warmth, after the volunteer nurse had pronounced her stable enough to sleep, after Alma promised she would not let the child wake alone. Bear had stayed planted on the floor, refusing food, refusing rest. But the way he had laid his chin back down once Walt had leaned close to speak to him, that quiet truce, had been enough. Now the little convoy rolled up to the dark farmhouse where this night had begun. Walt slowed long before the yard, headlights cutting across the low roof, the porch half buried in drift and shadows. The second cruiser swung wide, blue glow splashing over the weathered siding and a line of bare maples that shuddered in the wind. No other lights burned. The house seemed asleep or pretending. They killed their engines, and for a moment only the ticking of cooling metal and the faint hiss of falling snow filled the world. Walt opened his door, the cold striking sharp, and stepped out with steadiness that came from years of calls like this, but never enough to dull them. His boots sank with a crunch. Harris followed, radio low on his shoulder but not yet keyed. The two men stood a moment, looking at the silent house. Blue light spun across Walt's face, catching the lines that had deepened since he'd first seen the child. He adjusted the collar of his coat and started forward, one deliberate step after another, Harris just behind. Each crunch of their boots sounded loud against the hush of new snow. On the porch, Walt paused, scanning windows with that same patience he had shown with the dog. He could feel the weight of what was inside, the anger that had driven a door open and cast a small girl into a storm. Harris shifted behind him, but said nothing. The younger man's breath came fast and white. Walt's slower, controlled. He rapped on the door with a flat palm, not a knock of courtesy, but of presence. "Sheriff's office," he called, voice carrying just enough to cut through walls. Silence. He knocked again, harder. A light flickered on somewhere inside, pale and reluctant. Harris's hand drifted near his belt, but Walt stayed loose at his side. He called once more, "Open up." The words were calm but threaded with something that would not be ignored. When the door creaked finally, it was only a few inches. Chain still on. A man's face, red-eyed, unshaven, stinking faintly of whiskey even to the cold, appeared in the gap. He squinted at the lights behind them, at the uniforms, and said, "Nothing." "Evening," Walt said, as if they'd stopped by about fence posts and not a child almost lost to the snow. "We're here on a welfare check." The man's eyes flicked past him to the cruisers, the blue pulse filling the yard. "She's not here," he muttered. "That's right," Walt answered, voice flat now. "She's safe. We're here about you." The man tried to shut the door, but Walt's hand moved fast and firm, catching the edge before it latched. "Don't," he said quietly. Just that one word, but the air changed. Harris stepped up beside him, presence doubling. Inside, somewhere deeper in the house, a radio played low static. The man hesitated, then let the door swing wider, chain dropping. His gaze darted between them, defiance and fear tangling in equal measure. Walt stepped in, snow melting off his boots into the threshold. "We'll be talking," Walt said, "tonight and again soon, about a child left to freeze." His tone didn't rise, but it filled the hall as surely as the swirling blue light filled the yard. Outside, the second cruiser's engine clicked softly as it cooled, and the snow kept falling, slow and heavy, erasing tracks almost as soon as they were made, but not before leaving enough. The clear record of boots that had come to stand between the night and a little girl. The house smelled of stale beer and wood smoke that had gone out hours ago. Walt took 2 steps into the narrow hall, boots dripping onto warped boards, and the man at the door, broad-shouldered, unshaven, the same voice that had thrown a child into the night, staggered back enough to clear space. Then, like a match struck on damp stone, anger flared. "You got no right to barge in here," the man roared, the sound booming to the cramped entry and up the dark stairwell. He jabbed a finger, chest heaving, face red beneath patchy stubble. "My house, my kid. She ran off, that's all. You think you can just—" Walt didn't move. He stood loose but planted, hat brim shadowing steady eyes. The storm of the man's voice rolled over him, without a ripple. Behind him, Harris shifted slightly, weight balanced, one hand near his radio but not drawn. Walt lifted one palm, just enough for his partner to wait. "You're done yelling," Walt said quietly. The quiet was worse than a shout. It dropped between them heavy and cold, made the man blink as though sound itself had shifted. Outside, the swirling blue lights pulsed against the window glass, throwing strips of color across Walt's lined face. He took one step closer, slow and deliberate, until they stood just 2 feet apart. "That girl," Walt continued, voice even but edged like a winter river, "nearly died out there tonight. Socks, pajamas, 8 years old in a storm." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Each word landed like a hammer anyway. "You will not raise your voice to me. You will not put her in that cold again." The man's hands twitched at his sides, fingers curling and uncurling. He tried another surge of bluster, but it came out cracked. She doesn't listen. Mouthy little." Walt's look cut him short. Just a look, but it carried 20 years of calls and long nights and doors like this one. "Stop," Walt said. The single word landed with finality. "We're past your excuses." Harris moved now, stepping into the edge of the light. He didn't speak, but the quiet presence doubled the weight of the room. Walt let the moment stretch until the man's breath came shallow, shoulders still wide but sagging just enough to show cracks. "You left bruises," Walt said then, not loud, not questioning. Statement of fact. "I saw them." Color drained from the man's face. For the first time his eyes flickered, not toward threat, but toward worry, calculation. "She's clumsy, always falling." "Enough," Walt's voice sharpened just once, steel flashing under the comm. "We know what we saw. You will not talk yourself out of this." The air shifted again. The fight went slack at the edges. The man's chest still heaved, but quieter now, breath clouding faintly in the cold seeping through the door. Outside, the cruiser radios cracked with distant static. Harris thumbed his mic once, a soft check-in, and the sound seemed to seal the moment. Walt didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He just let silence stand until the roar drained into something small and human and cornered. "We're leaving with the report filed in the child safe," he said, voice level once more. "You will expect contact from child services and the court. You will comply. Do you understand?" The man swallowed hard, eyes darting to the cold blue wash flickering across the walls. "Yeah," he muttered finally, no more thunder in him. Walt held his gaze a heartbeat longer, then stepped back toward the door, motioning Harris to follow. The storm outside seemed quieter now, though the wind still moved across the yard in long sighs. At the threshold, Walt looked back one last time. Not at the man, but at the small hallway lined with boots and coats and the lingering echo of a child's life inside. His face gave nothing away, but the set of his shoulders promised this wasn't finished. Then he turned and went back into the snow, boots marking a straight, uncompromising path toward the waiting light. Snow whispered against the windows while the blue lights far down the lane turned and faded into the storm. Inside, the kitchen had settled again into its deep night hush. The heater hummed and cast an amber circle over the floor where Lila still slept, quilted and small, breath coming soft but steady now. Bear had not moved from his post except when the girl stirred. Then he would shift, nose close to her cheek until she quieted, before resuming his patient sprawl across the threshold that led to the front room. When the last echo of engines finally died, he rose. Stiff at first, an old dog unfolding careful bones. But once up he filled the doorway with a presence that felt larger than his frame. Hackles lifted just slightly along his spine, not the bristle of attack, but the signal of something on watch. He turned his head toward the door, ears pricked, and stood without a sound. Mrs. Ellery paused with the kettle in hand, watching him from the kitchen. "Easy, boy," she murmured, but didn't try to coax him away. She seemed to understand this was his duty as much as breathing. She moved quieter herself, setting the kettle down, padding to the couch to adjust the quilt that had slipped from Lila's shoulder. The girl stirred at the light touch, eyes fluttering open for just a breath before sliding shut again. Her fingers, even in sleep, sought Bear's fur but found only air. At the faint searching movement, the dog turned and came back a step, just enough for a small hand to brush against his flank. He leaned into it briefly, a silent reassurance, then stepped back to his watch. The house smelled of soup and damp wool, and faint with smoke from the stove she had coaxed to life earlier. Each smell seemed to weave around the child, like a promise. Bear's ears twitched with every creak of timber, every hiss of the heater, every gust that rattled the siding. The storm was not gone. It pressed at the windows with low moans, but the threat of it felt far now. Still, he watched. Mrs. Ellery moved to a chair near the couch, her body sinking slow with exhaustion. She kept her hands busy, rubbing warmth back into her own arms, straightening the socks on Lila's feet, glancing often at the door and at Bear. They shared a brief, silent understanding. She wouldn't have to guard the threshold alone. The dog's tail swept once across the wood floor, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging her, and then returning to his own silent calculus of scent and sound. His body was tired, paws raw from ice, fur heavy with thawing clumps, but nothing in his stance wavered. Minutes stretched. At some point, Mrs. Ellery's eyes closed. Not full sleep, but the kind that comes when a body can't fight rest anymore. Bear did not move. When Lila whimpered softly in a dream, he turned his whole head, took one step closer, and placed his nose near her cheek until her breathing steadied again. Then he returned to the doorway and stood, tall as he could manage. The faint trace of tire tracks and blue light still lingered in his animal memory. He had seen men take the cold and the shouting away. He seemed to know the fight now lived somewhere outside these walls, in places of paper and voices and doors he would never enter. But the room behind him, warm, fragile, alive, that was his. In the dim kitchen light, his eyes shone gold and dark all at once, watchful and sure. No sound left him, only breath and the small rustle of fur as he shifted his weight. For now, that was enough. The child slept on, the house held, and Bear, silent witness to a night that had almost ended differently, kept guard until the edges of the storm began to blur into the pale wash of another day. Morning came slow, a gray wash of the curtains, the storm's teeth dulled but still gnawing at the edges of the world. The kitchen was softer now, the sharp scent of fear replaced by broth and wood smoke. Lila stirred under the quilt with small, uncertain movements, blinking up at the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment her eyes darted wild, but then they found Bear curled on the floor beside her, head up instantly when she moved. His tail gave one slow sweep. The sight of him steadied her in a way nothing else could. Mrs. Ellery was already at the stove, hands steady though her body showed the long night's weight. Walt stood near the door, radio murmuring faint updates. He'd been there for hours, waiting for the next step to arrive. Paperwork filed, orders signed, the system slowly grinding into action. When the distant crunch of tires broke through the quiet, he moved to the window and looked out. Another cruiser, this one without light spinning, just steady and official. He gave a single nod. "Morning's here," Walt said quietly. Time to move her someplace warm and safe for longer than a night. Mrs. Ellery's mouth pressed in, but she nodded. She'd known it would come. She set the kettle aside and went to Lila, kneeling so the girl wouldn't have to lift her head far. "Sweetheart," she said gently, brushing damp hair back, "you're going to go with Walt and the other deputy. They got a better place for you. Warm bed, people to watch over you." Lila didn't answer, only shifted close to Bear, who leaned his great head onto her lap. Walt approached, slow and careful, carrying his heavy winter coat. He crouched until he was level with her eyes. "You can take this, kiddo. It's mine, but it'll keep you warm." The coat was far too big, swallowing her small frame until only her face peeked out from the collar. She kept one hand tangled in Bear's fur as she stood, legs shaky but working. Walt waited, not rushing her, just watching with the quiet patience of a man who knows trust is earned in small increments. Outside, the snow still whispered under boots. The cruiser sat with engine idling, exhaust curling pale against the cold. Walt guided Lila down the steps one slow step at a time, hand firm but gentle at her back. Bear trotted alongside, stiff but determined, every step marked with loyalty. When they reached the car, Harris opened the back door. Lila looked uncertain for a moment, clutching the coat closer, eyes darting to Bear. Before anyone could speak, the dog sprang up in one clean, surprising motion, landing on the back seat with a heavy thump that rocked the whole car. His paws scrambled for a second on the vinyl before settling. Then he turned, planted himself right beside Lila, chest pressed to her side as if sealing the seat as hers and his alone. Harris blinked. "He's not. He's coming," Walt said simply, not even looking up from where he was adjusting the coat's collar around Lila's face. There was no question in his voice, just quiet certainty. "He's earned the ride." Bear looked out the window once, then back at the girl, tail sweeping the seat in one slow arc. Lila's small hands vanished into his ruff. She didn't speak, but her whole body leaned into him. Walt closed the door carefully, gave the dog's head one firm pat to the open window before it latched. "Keep your post, big man," he murmured. Bear blinked, solemn and satisfied. Snow squealed under the tires as the car began to move, pulling away from the little farmhouse that had been a lantern in the night. Mrs. Ellery stood on the porch, one hand raised, the other gripping the railing. She didn't smile, not yet, but there was a quiet steadiness in her face, the look of someone who knows the worst is over and the hard work is ahead. Inside the car, warmth built slowly. Lila stared out the white fields passing, small hands still tangled in fur. Bear leaned heavier until she could feel his heart thudding, a living drumbeat under her palm. Walt drove in silence for a while, eyes on the road, but in the mirror his gaze flicked to them often. When he finally spoke, it was low and sure, meant only for her. "You're safe now, kid," he said. "We're taking you where the cold can't find you." She didn't answer, but her shoulders dropped just a little. Bear's tail swept once more across the seat, a slow, quiet promise. And the car rolled on through thinning snow, carrying the girl, the dog, and the men who had chosen to stand between her and the night. The sheriff's office was built of old pine and radiators that hummed like distant bees. Walt had pushed the door wide and let the warmth flood over them before any introductions or questions were made. Lila's boots, borrowed from Mrs. Ellery, squeaked against the worn linoleum. She clutched Walt's coat close around her small frame, eyes darting to the unfamiliar desks and softly glowing lamps. Bear padded beside her without leash or command, his fur drying in slow patches, every inch of him poised to shield her if the air shifted wrong. A young dispatcher with tired eyes and a kind smile was first to move. She had already set out a thick wool blanket and a chipped mug that steamed with cocoa. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said, voice gentle and practiced. Lila hesitated, but when the scent of chocolate reached her, she took the mug, hands trembling slightly. Bear pressed his shoulder into her legs until she steadied enough to drink. Walt crouched nearby, not looming, just making sure the giant coat didn't swallow her whole. "You're safe here," he said simply. "We've got people to help. Just warm up and let the medic check you over." The medic, Tom again but now in clean gear and with a small kit, knelt on the floor respectful arm's length away. He looked at Bear first, waiting until the dog's deep gaze softened a fraction, then inched closer. "Hey, big guy," he murmured, then to Lila, "Mind if I see your hands, kiddo? Just making sure those fingers get pink again." Lila glanced at Walt and got a small nod. She extended one tiny hand on the blanket. Bear shifted but didn't growl, simply rested his broad paw over his shin, heavy and protective. Tom's hands were gentle as he felt for her pulse and warmth, checking nails, knuckles, then ankles and feet. "She's okay," he said quietly to Walt. "Some frost nip, nothing deep. Needs rest, warmth, maybe a doctor follow-up, but nothing we can't manage tonight." Relief rippled across the room, silent but real. Walt straightened slowly, the wear of the night etched deep into his face but tempered by a quiet satisfaction. "Good," he said. Paperwork began after cocoa and warmth. A deputy rolled a small desk closer, spreading forms in careful stacks. Walt stayed near, reading each line aloud so Lila wouldn't be lost in words. "We're just writing down what happened so people can help you," he explained. "Nobody's to send you back where it's cold." Each time the child's gaze wavered, Bear's tail brushed her side or his nose nudged her knee until she found courage to whisper a few words or nod. Between the legal phrases, there were other, gentler promises. Alma Ellery's name written as contact, a note that Bear was bonded to the child and should stay by her side for now. Walt signed his own name under statements of protective hold and emergency care, slow, deliberate strokes of his pen like anchors on the page. At some point, the dispatcher slipped back in with another blanket fresh from the dryer. "Smells like sunshine," she said softly, tucking it over Lila's shoulders. The girl's eyes fluttered closed for a second at the sudden, almost shocking warmth. Bear huffed, low and content, curling closer until his broad paw rested firmly across her legs, as if to stamp a seal on the arrangement. Outside the windows, morning snow swirled in pale light, but the world felt far away. Here there was a click of pens, the steady hum of heat, the clink of mugs on wood. Walt leaned back in his chair finally, watching the girl sip the last of her cocoa. He caught her looking at him just once, a quick shy glance that slid away again. He smiled but didn't push. "You'll be okay," he said after a long quiet. "We'll make sure of it." She didn't answer, but her shoulder sank an inch lower, and Bear, catching whatever signal passed between them, gave one slow wag of his tail before settling again. The night's terror seemed to retreat another step, leaving behind a fragile shape of safety, built with paper and warmth and the steadfast weight of a dog's paw. The morning had aged enough for pale light to push through the sheriff's office windows, turning the snow outside to dull silver. The worst of the storm had moved on, though fine flakes still drifted like ash. Inside, the building smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. Lila sat curled in an armchair now, the wool blanket still wrapped tight around her shoulders, Bear lying sprawled across her feet, like a dark and breathing footstool. His ears twitched at every door creak, but he stayed put, the weight of his presence steadying her more than any words could. Walt sat at the corner desk with phone wedged against his shoulder, flipping through a notepad where he'd scribbled names and numbers. Each call began the same way. Calm voice, measured details. Request replacement. 8-year-old female, emergent removal. He said for the third time that hour. Voice even but heavy. No immediate kin available. She's safe for now, but needs a bed tonight. On the other end, systems hummed and clicked. Voices promised a check, to call back. He thanked them all the same, though with each hang-up his brow deepened. Mrs. Ellery, who had driven in behind him after making sure her own home was buttoned against the cold, stood quietly near the coffee pot. She poured 2 mugs, carried one to Walt without asking, then came back to Lila and crouched low. "Sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from the girl's face. "You holding up?" Lila's eyes flicked up for a second, unsure, then back down. But the tiniest nod came, almost hidden. Bear's tail tapped once, as if confirming the answer. Mrs. Ellery looked over to Walt. Something settled behind her eyes. "You're calling strangers," she said, not accusing, just stating what she saw. "It's the process." Walt replied, "Phone back in its cradle for now. State will find someone soon. Paperwork's already in. Just takes time." She was quiet for a beat, sipping her coffee, gaze returning to the child and the dog. Then she said, almost to herself but loud enough to be heard, "She doesn't need strangers tonight." Walt looked up sharply. "Alma, I've got the room," she said simply, standing now but keeping her voice gentle so it didn't startle the girl. "I'm warm, I'm safe, and she knows me. Dog knows me too. I can keep her tonight until they sort it out." Walt studied her for a long moment. His eyes were tired but still sharp. "It's a lot to ask." "It's not," Alma said, firm now. "She doesn't need another strange bed. Not after last night." They both glanced at the couch where the girl sat with Bear's head heavy across her lap. She wasn't asleep, but listening wide-eyed. At Alma's words, some of the rigid tension in her small body seemed to loosen. Walt noticed it too. He sighed, rubbed his beard. "You know what it means? Paperwork, checks, follow up." "I know," Alma said. "I'll sign what you need." Walt's gaze lingered on her face, then shifted back to Lila. The child's eyes were on him now, cautious but pleading without sound. Bear thumped his tail again, and it almost felt like a vote. Finally, Walt nodded. "All right, for tonight. I'll file temporary placement, emergency kinship. It keeps her safe and still lets us move the legal wheels." Relief flickered across Alma's face. "Thank you." Walt stood and moved to the girl, squatting so he was level with her again. "Kiddo," he said softly, "how would you feel about going back with Mrs. Ellery? Just for tonight. Warm bed. Bear can come too." Lila hesitated only a heartbeat before her fingers tightened in Bear's fur, and she gave the faintest nod. The dog looked from her to Walt and back, as if to check the plan, then let out one low, satisfied huff. "That's settled then," Walt said. He straightened, voice a little rougher now, but steady. "We'll get the form signed and keep you together for the night." Alma touched the child's shoulder gently. "We'll stop at my house first thing. Warm fire, pancakes if you want." For the first time, Lila's face changed, not a smile yet, but a tiny flicker in her eyes, something lighter than fear. Bear rose carefully, shook himself out, and moved closer to Alma as if recognizing the shift. Walt started gathering papers and making one last call to confirm the temporary placement. While he talked, Alma helped Lila to her feet, wrapping the blanket snug again and slipping her boots back on. Bear stayed glued to her side, ready to follow anywhere. It was still cold outside, but not the same kind of cold they had faced in the night. This one felt survivable. When the door swung open again, letting in a breath of winter, Walt looked over and saw the pair, woman, child, and dog, framed against the pale day. "I'll follow you over," he said. "Make sure you get in safe." Alma nodded, then bent to Lila's ear. "We're going home just for a little while." The girl's small hand found hers. Bear's tail moved once more, a quiet drumbeat of agreement, and together they stepped out into the cold that no longer had teeth. The first light came gently, pale and low across the snowfields, soft enough that the house seemed to breathe before it woke. In the spare bedroom off Mrs. Ellery's kitchen, a small shape stirred under layered quilts that smelled faintly of cedar and soap. Lila blinked against the unfamiliar ceiling, and for a moment panic flared. Strange walls, strange bed, until memory crept back in piece by piece. The storm, the cold, Bear, warmth, safety. She turned her head slowly, half expecting it all to vanish. But there was a window, edges rimed with frost turned gold by early sun. Beyond the glass the world glowed like a secret garden of ice. And there on the braided rug, sprawled and snoring in quiet huffs, was Bear. His massive body looked smaller somehow in sleep, paws twitching now and then as if chasing some slow dream. One ear flicked when she shifted, but he didn't wake. The room was warm, a gentle with heat radiating from the vent, and the faint crackle of something burning in the kitchen stove beyond the half-open door. Lila sat up a little, still wrapped like a parcel in quilts too big for her. The movement sent a sweet, unexpected comfort through her chest. Not fear, not hunger, just a soft ache of knowing she was alive and warm. Her toes brushed thick socks. She remembered Alma pulling them on with firm, careful hands, and the feeling of them was almost strange after hours of numbness. She wiggled them once, testing. The little victory brought a shy, private smile. Bear's ears twitched again, and his tail swept a single lazy arc against the rug. She whispered, "Hey, Bear," and he sighed in response without lifting his head, as if to say, "Still here." The scent of pancakes reached her next, warm and sweet. It slipped under the door with a low hiss of something frying. Another sound followed, not threatening but homely. The slow scrape of a spatula, a soft clatter of plates. She hugged the quilts closer and listened. There was no shouting, no crash of anger, just a woman humming under her breath and the safe tick of a clock. After a while, Alma appeared in the doorway, apron tied loosely over her sweater, hair pinned back in its morning haste. She paused when she saw Lila awake, smile quiet but sure. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're safe." Lila didn't speak, but her shoulders eased. Alma came in slowly, crouched at the bedside. "How are those fingers and toes?" she asked, gentle hand checking the girl's face for lingering cold. "Warm enough." Lila nodded, small but real. Her gaze slid to Bear, still snoring. Alma followed it and chuckled under her breath. He didn't move an inch all night, kept his watch. Something inside Lila loosened then. Her lip trembled once but held. Alma pretended not to notice, just tucked the quilt snug again. "Breakfast on," she said. "You think you could eat?" "Pancakes, honey butter, warm milk." Another small nod, and this time the girl's voice faint but certain. "Okay." Bear woke fully at the sound, head lifting, eyes bright now. He stretched long and slow, groaning like an old door, before padding over to rest his heavy chin on the bed. Lila's hand disappeared into his fur, without thinking. Alma let the moment sit, quiet and whole. "Take your time," Alma said, standing. "No hurry today." As she left the kitchen again, Bear climbed partly onto the bed, ignoring size and etiquette, until half his weight pressed against quilts. Lila buried her face in his neck and breathed deep. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world smelled like safety. Warm dog, pancakes, clean sheets. The window blazed brighter as the sun climbed, scattering gold across the frost and catching on Bear's fur until he looked lit from within. Lila touched his collar, the metal tag cold against her fingers, and whispered, "We made it." He gave one soft rumble and laid his head across her lap. In that pale room, with snow turned harmless by the morning, and the house alive with simple sounds, the night's terror shrank into something far away. There would be more days to come, questions and papers and decisions, but for this moment there was only warmth, light, and the steady beat of a dog's heart beneath her small hands. The breakfast plates were still warm on the table when another pair of boots sounded on the porch. Bear's head came up first, ears stiff, tail motionless. He gave one low breath, not a bark, but a kind of warning that said he remembered the night. Lila froze where she sat on the bench by the window, her hands curling automatically in his fur. Mrs. Ellery touched her shoulder once, murmured, "Just friends," and went to the door. Two deputies stepped inside, shaking snow from their coats, faces lined but kind. They carried no menace, but they brought with them the heavy scent of paperwork and process. One was Harris, who had driven behind Walt the night before. The other a younger woman with dark hair tucked under her hat. Both looked first at Lila, a quick sweep that softened when they saw her tucked safe in quilts with pancakes gone from her plate. Harris nodded gently to Alma and then crouched a bit, keeping his voice careful. "Morning, kiddo. We're just here to follow up, make sure you're warm and safe." Lila didn't speak. She pressed closer to Bear. The dog leaned back into her, chest rumbling soft but protective. The younger deputy offered a small smile and a quiet hi. Then she glanced at Harris and back to Alma, voice lowering but still audible enough that Lila heard every word. "We got to talk about the dog," she said gently. "Standard to bring any animal from a case into holding. Check tags, health, chain of custody." Lila's reaction was instant and fierce. She slid from the bench, small arms flinging around Bear's neck. So fast the dog startled and settled, lowering himself so she could hang on. "No," she said, voice raw and breaking, but louder than she'd spoken yet. "He's mine." The words came out fractured, desperate, but clear. Bear didn't move except to press closer, wrapping the child in warmth. The deputies exchanged a look, procedural but human, and Harris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not about taking him forever, sweetheart," he tried, soft but awkward. "Just paperwork." Before more words could stumble, another voice came from the doorway. Walt. He'd arrived without noise, bringing with him the steadiness of someone who had already decided. His hat was off, his beard damp from the snow. He looked at the tableau. Small girl locked to the dog's neck, fear and defiance trembling together. And his face changed, something fierce and protective cutting through the weariness. "Not this one," he said quietly. Harris straightened, relief flashing but hidden. "Walt." "He's evidence, sure," Walt interrupted, still calm but absolute. "But he's also why she's standing here. He brought her out, kept her alive. We'll note it. He stays." The younger deputy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We can log him under protective status." "Do it," Walt said, eyes never leaving the pair on the floor. Then, softer, to Lila, "He's with you? No one's taking him." Lila's breath hitched once, a sob she'd been holding since the first car door slammed outside, and then she buried her face deeper into Bear's fur. The dog gave a great sigh, head settling heavy against her shoulder, as if even he understood the decision had been made. Alma's eyes shone, but she kept busy, setting another mug of cocoa down near the child's elbow. The deputies shifted paperwork to match the new plan, pen scratching, radio murmuring faintly. Walt stayed near, one hand resting briefly on Bear's broad back, the other smoothing Lila's quilt. "Sometimes rules have room," he said quietly, mostly to Harris but maybe also to the child, especially for the ones who did the saving. Lila didn't look up, but the rigid fear had eased from her spine. Her arms stayed locked around Bear, but now the hold felt less desperate and more like belonging. The deputies finished their notes and left with quiet nods, the door clicking shut behind them. Walt lingered only a moment longer, meeting Alma's gaze with a weary half-smile that held both gratitude and warning about the work ahead. Then he touched the brim of his hat to Lila. She peeked just enough to see it and said, "You two stay warm." When the house was quiet again, Bear shifted just enough to look up at the girl he'd carried through darkness. She sniffled, wiped her nose on the sleeve of Walt's too-big coat, and whispered into his fur, "Home now." The dog didn't know the word's full meaning, but his tail swept the floor in one slow, steady stroke, and he didn't move an inch away. The sun had climbed high enough to turn the snow to a blinding field of white when they pulled into yard of the small farmhouse that had once been a cage. Walt's truck idled out on the road while Mrs. Ellery steered her own car carefully up the drive, tires crunching through ice and old ruts. Lila sat in the passenger seat, swallowed by Walt's coat, eyes fixed on a house she'd left in the dark. Bear stood braced in the back, nose pressed to the cold glass, silent but watchful. They'd come with quiet purpose. Walt had said she didn't need to go inside. Alma would handle what needed retrieving. But when the car stopped, Lila's small hand found Bear's rough and held tight. "It's okay," Alma murmured, turning just enough to catch the girl's wary gaze. "You stay here with him. We'll be quick." The yard felt different in daylight. The storm had scrubbed it clean, erasing the night's desperate tracks, but the house remained grim and gray against the brilliance of the snow. One shutter hung crooked, banging softly in the wind. A child's red mitten lay frozen to the porch steps, half buried in drift. Alma's heart twisted, but she kept her face calm, steady. She reached behind her seat for a canvas bag and a folded cardboard box. "Just a few things," she told Lila, gentle but brisk enough to move forward. She opened her door and stepped into the cold. Bear was out before she could turn, leaping to the ground in one smooth motion. His hackles didn't rise this time. He simply stood between the car and the porch, massive and deliberate, eyes fixed on the silent doorway. Alma gave him a nod as though acknowledging an equal. "Watch her," she said softly. He didn't glance back but planted himself in the snow, a dark sentinel against the white. Inside the house, the air was stale and faintly sour. Alma kept her coat zipped and her steps light. She moved fast, a small backpack with a cracked zipper, a few clothes from drawers that still smelled of soap and coldwood. A single stuffed rabbit, ear torn but loved, sat half hidden under a blanket on the bed. She tucked it on top of the pile without hesitation. The work was quiet and methodical. She didn't linger in rooms that felt heavy with shouting. Each time she stepped back onto the porch, Bear met her, sniffing the bundles before letting her pass. Lila waited in the car, face pressed to the window, watching with solemn eyes. On the second trip, Alma looked over and saw the girl's small hand lifted just enough for a wave. Bear noticed too and tried the car before turning to escort Alma again. Walt joined her halfway through, having finished the call on the radio. He said little, just took a box from her, and together they made the final pass. "Only what she needs," he said quietly. "We'll get the rest another time, if she wants." When they finished, Alma packed the trunk with careful hands, tucking the rabbit where Lila could see it the moment she climbed back out. Bear hopped up in the car unprompted, as if sealing the job. Lila's face eased a fraction when she saw the stuffed toy and her bag. She reached to clutch both at once, burying her face in the worn fur of the rabbit before whispering something to Bear. The dog licked her cheek, quick and certain. Alma slid behind the wheel and looked at Walt through the open window. He nodded once, the quiet signal of a man satisfied the task was done without harm. "That's enough for now," he said. As the car turned and bumped back toward the road, Lila glanced once in the rearview mirror. The house stood small and sharp against the bright snow, but already it looked less like a place and more like a fading shape. Bear sat pressed close to her side, watching the same view until it disappeared behind a stand of pines. Only then did his great body relax. Sighing long and low, Alma reached across and squeezed the girl's hand once. "New porch next stop," she said softly. "One that's warm." Lila didn't answer with words, but she nodded just enough that Alma saw. And as the car carried them away, the sound of paws shifting and a tail brushing the seat filled the quiet space where fear had been. By the second morning, the little farmhouse at the end of the lane had begun to feel less like a refuge hidden from the world and more like the center of something quietly extraordinary. Alma noticed first when her landline rang before breakfast, a rare enough thing to make her glance at it with suspicion. It was Marlene from the diner, breathless and loud even over static. "Alma, did you see the Gazette?" "Front page," she said before Alma could answer. The paper landed not long after, delivered by a neighbor's teen on his four-wheeler, the engine buzzing away into the snowy distance. Alma bent to pick it up from the porch and stood a long time with the cold biting her ankles, just staring. There, across the fold, a photograph, her living room, though she hadn't noticed anyone take it. Tom the medic must have snapped it quietly. The picture caught the fire in soft glow in two central figures, a small girl wrapped in quilts, hair still tangled, cheeks pink from warmth returning, and a dog planted beside her, broad and solemn, head turned slightly toward the camera as if aware of his role. The headline stretched in bold black letters, "OLD Dog Saves Child in Midnight Storm." Inside, Lila was at the kitchen table, clutching Bear's collar with one hand and nibbling toast with the other. She saw the paper as soon as Alma stepped back in, eyes widening but not fearful, more startled. "That's us," she whispered. Bear gave a small low huff as though in agreement. Alma set the paper down, but didn't push it closer. "Word gets out in a town this size," she said gently. People like to know when something good happens. She reached over and poured more cocoa for the girl. You're safe. That's all anyone cares about. But the ripples went farther than just a Gazette. By mid-morning, the phone rang again. First, a school nurse asking if supplies or clothes were needed. Then a pastor who'd heard and wanted to offer help. Then the librarian offering books and a quiet place if Lila ever wanted to visit. Each call came with the same soft astonishment. An old dog had braved a blizzard. A neighbor had listened. A life had been pulled back from the dark. Bear seemed to sense the attention, but remained unchanged. He sprawled by the fire, snoring occasionally, only lifting his head when Lila moved. She stayed close to him, still shy with strangers, but calm inside Alma's walls. When the Gazette photographer knocked politely later in the day, Alma let him in only because Walt had sent word ahead. Nothing fancy, Walt had said on the phone. Just a picture to remind folks what matters. The photographer, a thin man with fog glasses, took his time setting up by the hearth. Lila didn't want to pose, but when Bear shifted and pressed against her knee, she stayed. Alma sat nearby but outside the frame, letting the moment belong to the two who had walked through the night together. The shutter clicked quietly, and for the first time a trace of something like pride, fragile but real, touched the child's face. That afternoon, the Gazette's article spread online, though Alma didn't own a computer to see it. Phones buzzed instead. Neighbors dropped off bread and mittens and warm boots left on the porch without knocking. Walt stopped by with paperwork updates and a quiet grin when he saw the paper on the table. "Looks like the world knows about our hero," he said, scratching behind Bear's ears until the tale swept a lazy arc. Lila didn't say much, but she studied the headline again and again. Each time she did, her hand would find Bear's ruff, fingers curling into safety. Once, long after Alma thought she'd gone back to her drawings at the table, the girl spoke in a small, almost shy voice. "They know he saved me." "Yes, honey," Alma said, keeping her voice warm but steady. "Everyone knows." Bear opened one eye at the sound, gave a single thumb of his tail against the rug, and drifted back to sleep. The room filled with quiet light and the scent of wood smoke and toast. Outside, the town kept talking, but here in the farmhouse it felt simple. A girl, a dog, and the beginning of something new taking root where the cold had almost ended everything. The weeks that followed unspooled slowly, like a long-held breath easing out into air that no longer hurt to breathe. Snow still came, but now it arrived gentle, with daylight behind it, drifting past the kitchen windows while Alma made breakfast, and the radio murmured news that had nothing to do with danger. The farmhouse itself seemed to change. Once so still held its breath, now hummed with small, ordinary sounds. The creak of stairs as Lila patted down in socks too big for her, Bear's nails clicking faintly as he followed, the kettle singing for tea and cocoa. The first days were mostly quiet. Paperwork filled corners of tables, and Walt stopped by often, sometimes with forms, sometimes just to check the furnace or bring groceries on the way. Though Alma knew it was more than errands, he always crouched low to speak to Lila, voice calm, letting her know things were still safe, that no one would drag her back where fear lived. Each visit, Bear planted himself nearby, still watchful but calmer now, content to let Walt near so long as Lila didn't flinch. Slowly, the color came back. A faint blush on cheeks, a little more life in her eyes. Alma started small rituals. Pancakes most mornings, a trip to the henhouse for eggs, mittens kept warm on the stove. At first, Lila followed silently, but one morning when Alma cracked a particularly funny-looking double yolk, a tiny giggle escaped. Bear's ears twitched and his tail swept the floor. Alma looked up, smiled, and said nothing, just kept cooking as if laughter were the most normal thing in the world. By the time the first clear sky day arrived, the yard no longer looked haunted. Snow lay thick but soft, sparkling under a shy winter sun. Alma opened the back door and held out a small scarf. "Come on, let's get some air," she said. Lila hesitated, but Bear was already bounding out into the yard, clumsy with joy, plunging nose first into a drift and emerging powdered white. The sight broke something open. The child's shoulders lifted, and for the first time Alma heard a laugh that wasn't tiny or unsure, but bright and surprised. She stood a moment, stunned and grateful. Outside, the air was cold but kind. Lila followed Bear, boots crunching over the packed path, scarf trailing loose. The dog circled her with delighted snorts, shaking snow into the air until she squealed and stumbled back, still laughing. Alma watched from the porch, mug in hand, letting the sound wrap the house. No headlines, no legal words, just an 8-year-old laughing in a safe yard while the dog, who saved her, spun joyful circles. Eventually, Lila flopped down into the snow, arms outstretched in a clumsy angel, cheeks flushed. Bear immediately dropped beside her, rolling onto his back until his paws flailed skyward. She reached over and hugged his neck, face buried in warm fur despite the cold. "You found me," she whispered, words half lost in his ruff. He rumbled deep and content. Alma turned back inside, quietly, not wanting to break the moment. From a window, she watched them, small shapes against endless white. The snow kept falling but gently, harmless now. The house looked alive again, smoke curling from a chimney, light spilling across the yard where fear had once chased a child into darkness. In that soft winter light, future didn't seem like a question mark anymore. It felt small and sure, warm meals, safe mornings, paperwork slowly turning into permanence. A girl who could laugh, a dog who had chosen her and would not let go, a neighbor who had listened and opened a door. And somewhere beyond the fence line, Walt's quiet promise that the cold which had driven her out would never reach this yard again. Lila sat up at last, hair full of snowflakes, cheeks glowing. Bear leaned against her, massive and gentle, tail sweeping a rhythm of contentment. She looked back toward the house and saw Alma watching. For the first time, she lifted a mittened hand and waved. Alma waved back, smiling through the blur of steam from her tea. The snow kept falling, but here it meant nothing more than play and fresh tracks to follow. In the hush of the yard, laughter rose and curled with the breath of a dog, and a quiet future began to take shape, safe, warm, and softly bright.